This week in the Regency, it's all about stays. Yes, we finally got to the corsets part of corsets and coaches, but of course, in the Regency, people didn't wear what we think of as corsets. That's not quite true. Men did sometimes, as we can see from this cartoon. And the reason was very simple, that corsets are intended to pull you in tight so that you look good in tight clothing. But women's dresses in the Regency were not tight. They were gathered under the bust and then loose. And so there's absolutely no reason for anybody to tight lace, which was far less common even in Victorian times than people think. So what led me to stays? Well, it's the Bath Journal on the 1st of March, 1813. I found a fantastic ad by the King's Letters Patent. So she's actually lodged a patent. Mrs Lloyd Gibbons, the patentee from Sackville Street, London, most respectfully informs the nobility and ladies of Bath that she has now arrived at number 3 Henrietta Street, Laura Place, Bath, where ladies can be immediately suited with her highly distinguished patent stays. Now, Henrietta Street was quite a nice address. This is what the house next to it looks like now. I take these images of Google Earth or Google Maps, and interestingly, number 3 Henrietta Street is blurred out, which is what they do with places that they think might get bombed or might be some other way secret. But it's in a row of terrace houses that all look exactly the same, and so we can see what it looked like by looking at number 5. It's quite a nice address. She would have hired the house because there were a lot of houses available for hire in Bath. It was a holiday maker's place. People visited for the summer. They visited for the waters. There were people coming and going from Bath all year round, and particularly in the summer. And so there were, like every tourist area, there were a lot of houses to hire. And this would have been one of them. She would have set herself up for a couple of weeks, probably. And we know that because she goes around the country. I found other ads from her in Manchester, in Leeds, so she goes to cities, and she also offers in one of her ads to come to families or boarding schools, which is quite interesting. So stays, let's just think about what they are and what they're not. First of all, there were a lot of different kinds. In this period in 1813, a lot of young women were wearing short stays, which is the kind that Mrs Lloyd Gibbons makes. Prior to that, and depending on what you were wearing and where you were going, you might wear a long line stay like this. And in this period, we've come out, there was a fashion in the early part of the 1800s, in like the first decade, of wearing stays that pushed your breast right up. And Jane Austen had a few words to say about that being quite unbecoming. And the modern version of it, which is this period being far nicer. And so it's a more natural look at this point. As it happens, I have a pair of stays. My good friend Bronwyn Parry, who is a historical dressmaker as well as a Regency romance writer, has made me a pair. She wants me to tell you that they're not 100% historically accurate because they have metal eyelets down the front, but they're pretty accurate, as you will see. So this is what they look like at the front, and this is what they look like at the back. And what is holding them up, you have those lovely thick shoulder straps. Honestly, I don't know why we don't still have lovely thick shoulder straps. They're so comfortable. But what's holding them up at the front and the back is boning. And this is typically called whalebone, the stuff that they put in these narrow channels, narrow sewn channels. But it was, in fact, not whalebone at all. It was from the mouth of the baleen whale. And it's kind of a sieve process that they did to get the krill and so on that they eat. And it was much more bendable than bone, but still quite strong. And so, unfortunately, a lot of whales were killed in order for people to wear stays. Nowadays, we use plastic, or in corsets, steel busk. But we can see here how it was put together. And I want to show you, in particular, the difference between the eyelet that you would be familiar with, like you have on your shoes, for example, and the way that they were constructed during the Regency before that manufacturing process had emerged. Here are eyelets at the shoulder strap, which Bronwyn has sewn by hand. She makes almost everything she sews. All of her historical costumes pretty much are made by hand, which I find extraordinary. We can see how that then attaches to the shoulder. And it's what is really obvious on even just the quick look is how adjustable these things are. And that a pair of stays, they're called a pair of stays because originally there was lacing down the front and lacing down the back. So there were two pieces that you laced together. But a pair of stays would see you through a lot of body changes, pregnancy, for example. Weight gain, weight loss, in and out they go, up and down they go on the shoulder straps as well. And I'm quite sure that people used to borrow their sisters' stays and all that kind of stuff. So I got very interested in the idea of the patent stays, and I went looking for other people who made them. And I found quite a few. They advertised quite a lot. And this initial ad from Mrs Lloyd Gibbons was the plainest of all the ads. The others are very wordy, including later ones from her. And what we're seeing in them, as you can see here, is that she now starts calling them anatomical stays. Mrs Lloyd Gibbons, the patentee from Sackville Street, London, begs to inform ladies she has now arrived at number 61 Piccadilly, Manchester, where in consequence of other engagements, her attendance will not exceed a few days. That is, come and get it now. And she starts, this is the period where we start seeing people care about science. This is the Enlightenment. And so what we are seeing here is people talking about medicine, that stays are good for you, that they help fix problems with your carriage, including children. Children were wearing them here too. She's relying on science as her selling point. That's her point of difference. It's also interesting to note that she uses the word pregnant. I've just written a story last year called Second Chance at Christmas, which had a pregnant heroine. And I wasn't sure about, do I use that word? Were they using it in high society? I took the safe route of having her say she was expecting or that there's a child on the way. Because in Victorian times, it wasn't a term that was used by ladies. We didn't say that. And now I find that, in fact, it was all over the newspapers, so I could have done it. I'll remember that for the next book. So her point of difference was science. Other people's point of difference was price, as you might expect. Here's an ad from London from the 7th of May. From Marston and Company, beautiful, first of fashion, beautiful long stays. This is in Holywell Street, the Strand. To prevent mistake, the second stay shop on the left hand from Newcastle Street. So obviously several stay shops were together. It was like a lingerie souk. And he wants to make sure you go to the second one, not the first one, near the new church. Beg leave to acquaint that the ladies in general that are curious in taste and elegancies in long stays, which are far superior and in taste and fashion to any house in London. Ladies, by purchasing 2 pair of one size, will be entitled to the wholesale price for ready money, cash down, none of this putting it on account business. And so we can see that here he is a wholesaler. He's selling not only directly to the public, but he's selling to other shops elsewhere, probably elsewhere in England. Being fully competent to keep twice the assortment of any other in the trade. So they're a big wholesaler. And what is great about this ad is that it gives us prices. Now, remembering that these are probably cheaper than you would get from Mrs Lloyd Gibbons, who travels the country only dealing with society ladies. But beautiful, long and improved shape stays from 7 shillings to £1. Strong coloured corsets from 5 shillings to 10 shillings. Several hundred pairs of children's stays from 5 shillings 6pence to 7 shillings 6pence. Okay, so why are the coloured ones cheaper? Because you can't wear them under white, just like now. And so you might not want to put a strong colour under a very fine, remembering that muslin's a very fine fabric if you're wearing a muslin dress coming up into summer. We're in May. That the coloured corsets would be worn for winter or under stronger colours. And white, of course, was the most popular high society colour because it was a mark of wealth. It was expensive to buy and it was expensive to keep clean. You basically had to have servants. So a strong coloured corsets also implies we're maybe advertising to the working woman. Marston flatters himself by his long experience for upwards of 10 years as foreman and sole manager to Mr. Mill's business that he is competent to give every satisfaction to those ladies who choose to honour him with their commands. Marston is the sole inventor of the patent Talina stays. Now, unfortunately, I went to have a look. Unfortunately, the patents from this period are not online, so I couldn't show you the patents. But it's interesting that he's offering convenient rooms to try in and to prevent imposition in the trade. All orders are requested to be sent by hand or by post, paid. No connection with any other house. There are other ads. There's a surprising number of ads from a number of different people all around the country. Several in London, obviously, but also this idea of visiting and people coming to you while you're visiting that particular city. It's kind of like the traveling salesperson, but in a more refined way. And you would stay for several days. And there's a great one which I will follow up on in the process of finding these. I also found ads for dentists who did the same thing. So we'll follow up on that later in the year with the travelling dentist story. So stays were of different shapes, of different sizes, of different construction materials, but essentially they were fairly comfortable ways of creating the shape of the day, whatever that was. But in some ways far more comfortable than, for example, an underwire bra. When we come to the Victorian corset, it becomes a completely different thing altogether. And Bronwyn compares the tight-laced corset to very high stilettos. Some people wear them all the time. Most people only wore them for special occasions. Some people never wore them. So here to leave you is a final image, which I suspect was considered quite naughty at the time. And for those of you who've been following the fashions, if you remember the fashions for February with the Athenian bracer, I think we finally found a picture of the Athenian bracer, which is the red crossover thing that the woman in the middle is wearing. But we can see stays on the right-hand young lady there. And this is a different style altogether because it's French. And so there were national differences as well as differences for different age groups and different kinds of clothes. But essentially, they were made of cotton. They were worn over the top of the chemise, not next to the skin. So you could wear them for longer without them getting smelly. And they were designed, for the most part, to be quite comfortable. And no doubt, if you went to see Mrs Lloyd Gibbons, she would make sure that you had just the right pair of stays for you. That's This Week in the Regency. I'm Elizabeth Leyden. I'll see you next week in the Regency.